coming home, never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love, Lord, I'm coming home.
An old preacher was returning home from a revival meeting on one fall afternoon. He boarded an old train that was awfully crowded. He searched everywhere for a seat, and he finally found one beside a young man that was, he was probably 17 or 18 years of age. He went over to the young man and said, "Son, may I sit here with you?" The young man said, "Sure, sir." Then the old preacher sat down and made a remark. Something about the weather or such. Just trying to be friendly. But he didn't get any reply. He looked back at the young man and he saw a tear in the corner of the young man's eye. He said, "Son, I'm a preacher, a minister of the gospel. If you have a problem, it might be that I might be able to help you if you'd like to talk about it." Well, the young man said, "Sir, I feel that I must talk to someone." The old preacher said, "Go ahead, son. Let's hear what you have to say." So here's the story of the young man told the preacher on that cool fall day.
Coming home, coming home, never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love, Lord, I'm coming home.
The young man said, "Sir, about 8 months ago, I got so mean that my mom and dad, they just couldn't stand me any longer. I actually stooped so low that I struck my old gray-haired dad with my fist. Dad said, 'Son, if that's the best that you can do, you better find someplace else to live.' Well, I went upstairs to my room and I packed a few old clothes and an old duffel bag, and I hopped an old freight train out of town. You see, I'd never been anywhere from home like that before. I was so scared, and I didn't know where I was going to end up. I wound up in St. Louis, Missouri, of all places. That was a big old town. It was so dark and cold, especially at night. You see, I had no warm home to go to. I lived in the back alleys, slept on cardboard boxes. Well, I did the very best that I could. But you know, one night, that cold and the rain had gotten so hard to stand that I was going to go to the rescue mission. I couldn't stand it any longer. Well, there I met a dear old man of God, and he told me just how much the Lord loves me. He said he had died on a cross for my sins a long, long, long time ago. He said the Lord will actually forgive me of my sins and save me if I would let him. Well, that night, I went to that old-fashioned altar, the very best that I knew how, and I repented of my sins and gave my life to the Lord. You know, after that night, I got to thinking. about my dear old mom and my dear dad back home. I wonder if Dad could possibly forgive me for all that I had done wrong. I also wondered if he would let me come home. I was so homesick. I wanted to go so bad. Well, I sat down and I wrote him a letter. And I asked him to please let me come home, Dad. And the old preacher asked the young man, how are you going to know if your dad has forgiven you or not? The young man said, well, you see, sir, we live right beside the old railroad track. And in that letter that I'd written my dad, I told him that I was going to be on that old train today. And I said, Dad, if you could forgive me and let me come home, well, just tie a little white rag in that old apple tree out behind our home. And when I see the old rag in the tree, I'll get off the train. And if I didn't see it, I guess I'll just keep riding on down the track. Well, in a few minutes, the young man, he bowed his head and he began crying like a baby. The old preacher turned to the young man and said, Son, what's the matter? He said, Sir, we're almost there, and it's just around the next curve. And the young man, sobbing, said, I don't feel I can bear to look. Would you look for me? Well, the old preacher said, Sure, son, I'll be glad to be your eyes. Well, the old preacher reached in his pocket and he took out an old tattered handkerchief and wiped the steam from the window of the train so he could see real good. Oh, but you know what? That wasn't necessary at all. A blind man could have seen that old apple tree that day. Well, there wasn't just one rag in it. There must have been 40 or 50, and they were tied all over that old apple tree. And as they got a little closer, and the old preacher said, Son, look out there. And there stood the young man's old gray-haired mom and Dad with a bedsheet. They were waving that thing as high as they could, trying to say with everything that they knew how, welcome home, son. We still love you.
Coming